first of all, when the CIA tries to recruit an asset, they're not allowed to recruit American citizens unless they have special oversight powers given to them. But it's a lot of paperwork. So what they do is if they want to recruit somebody as an asset, so an asset, you have officers who are basically full-time employees. They typically recruit them straight out of college, although not always. When they try and recruit assets, they will find someone who has a cover and then hire them as basically kind of like a contractor, because it's easier to find somebody who has a cover and then hire them than it is to hire somebody to build a cover. And with my work at Microsoft, I was traveling in and out of Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. I met with the royal family. I met with cabinet members in Pakistan. I was meeting with high-level officials, and I traveled to places at the time that most Americans could not go. So I had the perfect cover on top of all of this. So what they do is when they want to hire an American asset, they either create like a dummy company and then hire them into the company, or they get one of their allies to try and recruit you. And then through that process. So they never approach, they will never come to you and be like, I work for the CIA, we want you to work for us as an asset. They don't do that. They will approach you as a businessman or a government official, or they'll pretend who they are, and they'll slowly groom you for a while. And then sometimes they'll pressure you, or sometimes they'll find out what your pressure points are. Is it ideology? Are you susceptible to money? Can they pressure you? So there's different pressure points they can apply, although it's usually money or ideology. They usually don't resort to the blackmail because it's frowned upon. One time I was in a particular Middle Eastern country, and I knew the person was working for the government. I had just, how do I say this delicately? I just given a presentation about certain high performance computing things, and it was this like private meeting that called at the last minute, and it wasn't on the calendar or anything. And I thought it was a bit strange to begin with. And I usually spoke to at least 50 people, or 100 or 1,000. And this room was like a closed room with no sign, and there were like 8 people in it. And when I got there, I found that they all worked for the government. And I was just like cracking jokes about, well, what would you use this high performance? Somebody asked me, they said, what would you use these high performance computing things for? And I was just making jokes like, oh, you could use it for analyzing the stock market. You could use it for looking for oil. And I said, you could use it for building missiles, but nobody's building missiles here. Like, ha, 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 jokingly. And this guy stands up and he goes, I'm from the Ministry of Defense. I'm very interested. Keep speaking. I was like, oh, okay. And so after that, one of the guys in that group came and approached me. He's like, have you ever thought about moving to our country? I'm like, never really crossed my mind. I've got family and kids, and they wouldn't really be happy in this country. And I enjoy visiting, but not exactly the place I want to live. And they're like, well, we could make your life very, very comfortable here. And I'm like, well, I always consider offers because I don't want to be rude because, Microsoft, you don't ever want to be rude to a government customer or really anybody. And I just said, well, what are you thinking? And he's like, well, you could live in a private house and you have maids and everything. And I'm like, well, how much would I make? And he's like, 10 times what you're making now. I'm like, do you even know what I'm making now? He's like, no, but it'll be 10 times. And I asked them, what would I be doing? And they're like, well, things like you're doing now, talking to government officials, consulting, telling us how to do this, how to do that. Because I was a software architect as well as other things. And it was very clear that this was, very sus work. And it happened in 2 other countries as well. And they were all very similar type offers. Like searching for the company didn't exist. And, you can find companies that don't exist when they're like 3 or 4 developers. But when you see 30, 40 developers in a room, and they're in the capital city of a place, they should exist somewhere in a phone book or something. And these guys just did not exist whatsoever. And so it became pretty apparent. I'm not 100% sure exactly what they did, but they were clearly analyzing intelligence data or satellite photos, or who knows what they were doing, but it was definitely not something I wanted to be involved in. Snowden, in his book, he talks about the first time that he started to turn on the U.S. was when he was stationed in Switzerland. He felt that the U.S. was up to basically no good. And this is in his book, and this resulted in Swiss parliamentary investigation. He saw a CIA agent who wanted information from a Swiss banker, and they went to the Swiss banker and they said, we need this information on these American accounts. And the Swiss banker, of course, said, no, it's Switzerland. The privacy laws are very strict. I cannot give this information. So what they did, and to make a long story short, is the CIA agent or officer, because they don't call themselves agent, CIA officer, basically framed the Swiss banker into a situation which caused him to be put into a Swiss jail. Then the CIA officer went to the jail and said, we can get you out if you do as we ask, but Now that you didn't cooperate as before, now we want more. So not only did he hand over the information, but he became a CIA asset for them later on. Because I know what happens to people who do that kind of work. I mean, the amount of money they were offering me, they're never specific as to what they want. Even when the FBI agent came to visit me in Bulgarian prison, they never come to you and they're like, hey, we want you to do this, we'll get you out. They're always evasive so that they can always do what's called plausible deniability later. So even in the prison, they came, they're like, well, because they knew the extradition was going to fail, which it did. So they wanted to get me to give myself up, just like they did with Sam Bankman-Fried. In fact, they got me in Bulgarian prison on purpose because they could have had me in a French prison or a Dutch prison. They had several opportunities, but they waited until I went to Bulgaria because they wanted me the worst prison possible, so I gave myself up, which I did not do. But they come and they say things like, if you give yourself up for extradition, everything will go a lot easier on you and we can probably work something out. They never say, hey, we want you to do this for us and we'll drop the charges. First of all, that would be a promise that would come back on them. So they're always very vague, but it's very absolutely clear what they want after all this. And it's the same thing when the other intelligence agencies tried to recruit me on behalf of the Americans. It's very vague what they wanted me to do, but the amounts of money they were offering me was 10 times what I was making at Microsoft, and I was making top dollar at Microsoft already. So we offered to turn myself in if they would guarantee me medical care and go to trial within the 70-day statutory limit without delay. They refused, and I have the court records of all of that. So now that I've gotten out of the Caribbean, it's really blown up in their face, and I've been able to really go after them, and they're just going into deep down hide mode, which is why they will not respond to the press anymore. You can talk to the press officers, the very same press officers that I have emails from in 2022. Tina Jagerson and Margaret Philbin, both of whom responded to press in 2022, saying that yes, he's wanted, his case is still open, but we have no comment. Now they will not even reply to press whatsoever at all. So what's happened in the last 2 years? I got the Russia, I'm no longer dying, and it's blowing up in their face.